For 7 years, little Alice lived through hell. Her skin was covered in red spots that burned day and night. The most expensive doctors in the country said the same thing. There's no cure. Her father, a powerful tycoon, spent millions. He took his daughter to the best hospitals, but nothing worked. His money couldn't buy his daughter's health until a simple cleaning lady, who barely had enough money to eat, did something forbidden. With trembling hands, she applied a strange liquid to the little girl's arm. The father yelled at her to stop, but what happened to the child's skin in the following seconds will leave you speechless. Mr. Roberto's mansion didn't look like a real house. It resembled one of those palaces you only see in movies about kings. It was located on the highest point of the city, surrounded by walls so high that no one could see what was happening inside. The gate was golden and shone so brightly in the sun that it hurt the eyes of anyone passing by on the street. The garden was immense, with flowers of every color, meticulously cut grass, and fountains that sprayed crystal-clear water high into the air all day long. In the garage, cars costing millions sat parked, polished and gleaming like sleeping beasts that never left their dens. To those looking from the outside, it was the perfect image of happiness. Everyone in the city thought the same thing. I wish I had that man's life. He has no problems. He has the world at his feet. Envy surrounded that place like a fog. People thought that inside there was no sadness, no pain, no lack of anything. But the thick walls of that mansion hid a truth that money couldn't mask. Inside, the house was cold. Not a cold in terms of temperature, because the air conditioning was always on at the ideal setting. It was a coldness in the soul. The floor was made of white marble, imported from far away, so smooth it looked like a frozen lake. And that's exactly what the house looked like, a large frozen lake where life couldn't sprout. The furniture was a work of art, chairs where kings could sit, tables of fine wood that would last 1,000 years. But nobody used those chairs to laugh. Nobody leaned over those tables to tell a funny family story. Silence reigned absolutely, as if he were the true owner of the house. Not a single song could be heard, not a single cry of joy, not even the sound of footsteps, because the Persian carpet swallowed up any noise. There were dozens of employees, all impeccably uniformed, walking with their heads down, like mute shadows. They had strict orders: no noise, no disturbance, no existence beyond their work. The house functioned like a Swiss watch. Everything on time, everything in its place, everything perfectly clean and organized. But it was a lifeless organization. It was like a museum where it's forbidden to touch anything. Mr. Roberto sat down to dinner every night at a long table that could seat 30 people. But he sat alone at the head of the table. The crystal chandelier above him cost more than the houses of all his employees combined, but the light it emitted couldn't illuminate the darkness Roberto felt in his chest. The best chefs prepared dishes that looked like paintings, with rare ingredients and exotic flavors. But for Roberto, the food tasted like cardboard. He chewed without tasting anything, swallowed without pleasure. He looked at the empty plate beside him and felt a tightness in his throat that no amount of water could swallow. He had the power to buy anything. If he wanted a plane, he could buy it. If he wanted an island, he could buy it. But he discovered the hard way that money is a liar. Money promised to give him everything, but it took away the simplest things. Through the bulletproof window of his office, he saw the gardener outside laughing with his son as they ate a simple lunchbox sitting on the grass. That scene, that simplicity, was worth more than the entire empire Roberto had built. He would trade all his gold, all his cars, all his buildings, just to have a minute of that peace the gardener had. But peace wasn't for sale in the shops he frequented. The house smelled of excessive cleanliness. It smelled of expensive lavender, but it didn't smell of home. It didn't smell of cake baking in the oven. It didn't smell of freshly brewed coffee for guests. It was a sterile environment where happiness seemed allergic to entering. Roberto walked the corridors at night, listening to the echo of his own expensive shoes hitting the hard floor. He stopped in front of the valuable paintings on the wall and felt nothing. He was a man who had conquered the world but lost his own home. He was the king of a ghost castle. But inside that mansion, something was dying, and nobody noticed. Roberto wasn't always this man of ice. There was a time when he smiled, a time when his eyes shone brighter than the gold coins he counted in the bank. That time had a name, Helena. She was the only person in the world who didn't care about his bank account. She loved Roberto, not Roberto's money. She was the light in that dark mansion. When she entered the room, it seemed as if the sun entered with her. But Roberto's happiness was short-lived. It lasted only as long as a sigh. The happiest day of his life was also the saddest. The day little Alice was born. Roberto held Helena's hand in the hospital. He promised everything would be all right. He hired the best doctors, the best team, bought the best medicine. He said, "I have the money, I'll take care of everything." But death doesn't accept checks. Death doesn't accept bribes. Helena passed away soon after hearing the baby's first cry. Her last words, in a weak whisper, were a weight Roberto would carry forever. "Take care of her for both of us. Promise." And he promised. He swore with a broken heart. From that day on, Roberto died inside. He looked at his daughter, Alice, and saw the face of his beloved wife. But at the same time, he felt a terrible fear, a blood-curdling dread. And when the red spots began to appear on the girl's skin, that dread turned to despair. They weren't just spots. For Roberto, it was a warning. It was as if fate were laughing in his face, saying, "You failed once, you will fail again." He kept Helena's room locked. No one could go in there, only him. Every night, when the house was in absolute silence, Roberto would enter that room. The scent of her perfume was still there, ingrained in the curtains, in the pillow. He would sit in the armchair where she used to read and cry. The most powerful man in the city cried like a lost child. He looked at her portrait on the wall, a large photo where she smiled without a care in the world. And he talked to the photo. He asked for forgiveness. "I failed, Helena," he whispered in the dark. "I have all the money in the world, but I can't cure our daughter. I'm useless." Guilt gnawed at his bones. He blamed himself for working too hard. He blamed himself for not being there longer. He blamed himself for being alive while she was dead. And now, seeing his daughter suffer with that infernal itching, with her skin sore and sensitive, the guilt became unbearable. He thought it was a punishment. He thought God was punishing his ambition. That's why he was so obsessed. That's why he yelled at the doctors. That's why he fired nurses for any silly mistake. He wasn't just trying to cure an allergy. He was trying to conquer death. He was trying to fulfill the promise he made to the woman he loved. Every time the little girl cried in pain, Roberto felt as if he were being stabbed in the chest. He looked at his daughter's tiny hands, marked by the mysterious illness, and saw his own weakness. He spent millions without a second thought. He brought in specialists from Europe and the United States. He bought creams that cost as much as a small car. He thought that if he spent enough, the guilt would go away. But the guilt wouldn't. The guilt slept with him and woke up with him. He looked at Alice and thought, "If she dies, I die too. I can't bear to lose her again." The fear of failure turned his love into a prison. He surrounded the girl with excessive care, forbade her from going out, from playing, from living. He wanted to protect her so much that he ended up suffocating her childhood. He looked at the empty garden where his daughter should have been running and felt a deep hatred. Hatred for the money that couldn't heal. Hatred for the doctors who knew nothing. Hatred for a life that was unfair. Roberto thought he was fighting for his daughter's life, but deep down, he was fighting the ghost of his own failure. He was blinded by pain, so blind that he couldn't see anything beyond his own suffering and his own arrogance in thinking that money was the only solution. Roberto never forgave himself, and what he didn't know was that his guilt was blinding him to the truth. Roberto decided he wasn't going to take no for an answer. He grabbed a world map and drew up a war plan. If the cure existed anywhere on Earth, he would find it. He had his private jet prepared. The suitcases were packed with designer clothes, but inside they contained only hope and fear. Little Alice, her arms bandaged to prevent her from scratching until she bled, looked out the airplane window, not understanding why she needed to travel so much. She just wanted to play. But her childhood had turned into a doctor's waiting room. The first stop was in the United States. They went to a hospital that looked like a luxury hotel. The floor shone. The receptionists smiled like magazine models. The doctor was famous, appeared on television, and had written 10 books. He looked at Alice, ordered dozens of tests. They drew blood from the girl so many times that she didn't even cry anymore. She just stayed quiet, with a lost look in her eyes. They put the girl in giant machines that made terrifying noises. Beep, beep, beep. Roberto paid a fortune up front. He thought, now it's going to work. This man knows what he's doing. But after a week, the doctor entered the room with his head down. He said those cursed words, "We've tried everything. It's a rare case. Science still has no explanation." Roberto wanted to smash the entire office. He shouted, offered double, triple the money. But the doctor only repeated, "I'm sorry." They didn't stop. They went to Europe. In Switzerland, at a clinic in the middle of the icy mountains, they promised a revolutionary treatment. They prescribed creams made with rare plants that only grew at the top of the world. They prescribed baths in special thermal waters. Alice shivered with cold in those white, sterile rooms. The doctors spoke strange languages, argued amongst themselves, looked at the girl's red skin as if she were a laboratory animal, not a child. They prescribed pills of all colors. Alice took the medicine and felt nauseous, vomited and became weak. Her father held her hand and said, "Hold on, daughter. It will pass." But it didn't. The spots only increased. The itching worsened, as if her body rejected it all. They returned to Brazil, but the pilgrimage continued. Roberto hired famous healers, bought light machines that promised miracles, tried diets where the girl could only eat green and tasteless things. The mansion became a warehouse of useless remedies. I had boxes and more boxes of ointments that never worked piled up in the corners. He had very expensive medical equipment gathering dust in the guest rooms. Each attempt was a hope that rose like a rocket and fell like a stone. With each, "I don't know what it is," he heard, a piece of Roberto's heart died. He began to hate doctors. He hated their impeccable white coats. He hated the calm way they said there was nothing that could be done. How could they remain calm watching a little girl suffer? Roberto, the man who commanded thousands of employees, felt like a dwarf in the face of that illness. He banged his fist on the table. He threatened to sue. He cried with rage in the airport bathroom. The feeling of powerlessness was poison. He had a credit card with no limit, but the cure wasn't for sale. Alice was already tired. She looked at her father with sad little eyes and asked, "Daddy, let's go home. I don't want to see the doctor anymore." That destroyed Roberto. He realized he was torturing his daughter in the name of a cure. After 2 years of traveling, spending vast sums of money, listening to false promises and wrong diagnoses, they returned to the mansion. The girl was worse than when she left. Her skin was raw. The father was more bitter, more withdrawn, more desperate. He looked to the sky and thought that God had forgotten him. He thought he had knocked on every door and that they were all locked. But the answer wasn't in any luxury hospital, nor in Switzerland, nor in the United States. The answer was much closer than he imagined. It was about to knock on his door, wearing a simple uniform and worn shoes. While Mr. Roberto flew in private jets and spent millions on treatments that didn't work, in a poor and forgotten neighborhood of the city, a woman named Maria counted coins on an old table. The table wobbled, the floor was of packed earth, and the roof leaked and wept when it rained. Maria had no diploma, no designer clothes, no car. What she did have were calloused hands from scrubbing floors and washing clothes for others. Her hands were thick, rough as sandpaper, but they had a mother's touch that healed any pain. Maria's life hung by a thread. That morning, the owner of the shack where she lived had banged on the door, shouting. He wanted the overdue rent. "If you don't pay by tomorrow, you're out on the street," he yelled, startling Maria's grandson, little João, who was lying in bed with a fever. Maria looked at the refrigerator. There was only a bottle of water and half a loaf of bread. She looked at the medicine cabinet. Empty. Despair hit her chest like a hammer. She needed money. She needed a miracle. She didn't have time to cry. Those who are hungry are in a hurry. It was while waiting in line at the health clinic, trying to get free medicine for her grandson, that she overheard the conversation. 2 women were talking about the mansion of sadness, the magnate's house high up on the hill. They said nobody could stay at that job. They said the boss was an ogre, that he fired the cleaning ladies for a speck of dust on the floor. They said the salary was great, but the price was their soul. Nobody can stand working there, girl. That place is cursed, one of them said. But when Maria heard the salary amount, her eyes lit up. That money would pay the rent, buy Joan's medicine, and there would still be enough left over to fill the refrigerator. Maria didn't think twice. The fear of hunger was greater than the fear of an angry boss. She put on her only going-out outfit, a simple dress, already faded from so much washing, slipped on the shoes that pinched her little toe, and took 3 crowded buses to get to the wealthy neighborhood. When she got off in front of the mansion, she felt like an ant. The gate was so large that she had to crane her neck to see the top. She pressed the intercom with a trembling finger. The voice that answered was dry and cold. They told her to enter through the service entrance, the back door, because people like her didn't enter through the front. As she walked through the service entrance, Maria saw cars she never imagined existed. She saw gardens that looked like paradise. But she lowered her head. She had learned early on that poor people shouldn't look too much at the wealth of others so as not to bother them. She was greeted by a housekeeper who looked like a general. The woman looked Maria up and down with disdain, wrinkling her nose at her simple dress and worn shoes. "Do you have experience with houses this size?" the housekeeper asked, doubtingly. "I have experience cleaning dirt, ma'am, and I have the courage to work," Maria replied firmly, swallowing her pride. She needed that job like she needed air to breathe. She thought of her grandson with a fever. She thought of the homeowner yelling. That gave her the strength to endure the look of contempt. The housekeeper explained the work. It was hard work, cleaning dozens of bathrooms, scrubbing immense hallways, polishing the silverware until she could see her own face in it. She couldn't sit, she couldn't talk, she couldn't complain. It was a job for 3 people, but Maria would have to do it alone. "Do you accept or not?" the woman asked, already expecting Maria to give up. But Maria nodded affirmatively. "I accept. When do I start?" "Right now," said the housekeeper, throwing a blue uniform into her arms. Maria put on her uniform. It was a little loose, but she adjusted it. She looked at herself in the servant's bathroom mirror and said a quick prayer. "God, give me strength. I do this for Joãozinho." She didn't have a doctorate. She didn't speak English. She didn't know the names of those complicated diseases. She was just a cleaning lady who knew the secrets of herbs, plants, and love. She thought she was only there to clean the floor and pay the bills. She thought it was just another day of struggle for survival. Maria didn't know it, but God was placing her exactly where she needed to be. The housekeeper, Donna Matilde, didn't walk. She marched. She wore a bunch of keys strapped to her waist that made an irritating clicking sound with every step. Clink, clink, clink. That sound seemed like a warning that danger was approaching. She took Maria to a secluded corner of the kitchen, away from the ears of the other servants. Matilda's gaze was cold, hard as stone. She pointed a long, thin finger right in Maria's face. "Listen carefully, Maria. Listen as if your life depended on it, because your job depends on it." Her voice was low but frightening. "In this house we have rules, and the rules here aren't made of clay, they're made of iron. If you break one, you're out before you even blink." Maria swallowed hard. She clasped her hands together to hide her trembling. She thought about the overdue rent. She thought about her hungry grandson. She needed to endure it. "Yes, ma'am, I obey," Maria replied, her head bowed. "Rule number 1, said Matilda, counting on her fingers. "Silence. Mr. Roberto hates noise. If you drop a broom, if you cough loudly, he gets nervous. And when he gets nervous, everyone suffers. You must be silent, invisible. You come in, you clean, you leave, no talking. Rule number 2, the housekeeper continued, moving closer. Never, ever, under any circumstances, speak to the boss. If he passes you in the hallway, you lower your head and look at the floor. He doesn't want to know who you are. He doesn't want to know about your life. To him, you are just a cleaning tool. Do you understand?" Maria agreed quickly. "I understand, ma'am. I won't look. I won't speak." But the housekeeper wasn't finished. Her expression grew even more serious, almost somber. She took Maria by the arm and led her to the beginning of a long corridor in the east wing of the house. The corridor was dimly lit. At the end of it was a large white door that looked like the entrance to a hospital. "Now," The most important rule. The golden rule, whispered Matilda, her eyes wide. That room at the end of the hall. It's Alice's room. From here to there, it's forbidden territory. You don't go in there. You don't go near there. You don't even breathe the air in that hallway. Maria looked at the white door. She felt a shiver. But who cleans there, ma'am? Maria asked without thinking. Nobody! Matilda snapped sharply. Only the special nurses who come from outside. The boss doesn't trust us with his daughter. He thinks we're dirty. He thinks we'll pass diseases on to her. The girl lives in a bubble. Nobody touches her without gloves. Nobody gets close. Matilda let go of Maria's arm and crossed her arms. I'm going to tell you something, so you don't forget. Last month, we had a young woman here, Joanna, a good woman, hard-working, but she felt sorry for the girl. One day, the door was open, and she saw the girl crying. Joanna came in just to return a doll that had fallen on the floor, that's all. She didn't do anything wrong, she just wanted to help. Maria's eyes widened. And what happened? Mr. Roberto saw it, said Matilda, shaking her head. He turned into a beast. He screamed so loudly the windows shook. He accused Joanna of trying to kill his daughter with germs. He fired the poor woman on the spot. He didn't even pay her for the day. He threw her purse on the sidewalk and threatened to call the police if she came back. Joanna left here crying, humiliated, without a penny in her pocket, and worse, he ruined her reputation throughout the city. Nobody will hire her anymore. Today she's starving. Matilda pressed her face very close to Maria's. Is this what you want for yourself, Maria? Do you want your grandson to go hungry? Do you want to be humiliated and thrown out like a mangy dog? Maria's heart was pounding. The fear was real. She needed that money more than anything. She couldn't afford to feel sorry for anyone. No, ma'am, for God's sake, I need this job. I won't go near that room, I swear. Excellent, said the housekeeper, adjusting her uniform. Then get to work. Start with the ballroom, and remember, I'm watching you. One wrong move and you're out. Maria grabbed the bucket and the mop. Her legs trembled as she walked away from that forbidden corridor. She repeated to herself, don't interfere. Don't look, don't listen. Do your job and go home. She was determined to be a robot. She would clean, scrub, and collect her money, nothing more. The pain of the rich wasn't her problem. She already had enough problems in her shack. Mary promised to obey. She promised with all her might. But some promises are made to be broken. The days in the mansion passed slowly, dragging on. Maria kept her promise. She cleaned, scrubbed, and remained silent. She was a shadow in a blue uniform, but Maria's eyes didn't obey the rules. Her eyes saw everything. While she polished the hallway floor, always keeping a safe distance from the forbidden white door, she watched the parade of men in suits and lab coats. They entered with their noses in the air, carrying gleaming leather briefcases. They spoke difficult words, words that felt like stones in her mouth. Atypical dermatitis, idiopathic syndrome, autoimmune rejection. Maria couldn't read those words, but she could read people. And what she saw in the faces of those doctors wasn't certainty. It was pride. They weren't looking at the girl. They were looking at the papers, the exams, the machines. On a rainy Tuesday, fate offered a chance. A nurse rushed out of the room to get something and forgot to close the door ajar for a few seconds. It was just a crack, but it was enough. Maria was mopping the baseboard, kneeling on the floor in a praying position. She looked up and saw. Inside, on the enormous bed that seemed to swallow the child, lay little Alice. The girl's arms were free of bandages at that moment. Her skin was red, irritated, covered in scabs that looked like scales. The girl cried softly, a weary cry of someone who no longer has tears. At that instant, time stopped for Maria. Her heart leaped in her chest. It wasn't shock. It wasn't disgust. It was a memory shock. Maria closed her eyes and suddenly she was no longer in the rich mansion. She was back in the countryside, in her grandmother Zepha's wattle and daub house 30 years ago. She remembered her younger sister, Ritinha, crying with the same pain, with her skin exactly like that. Everyone in the countryside said it was a curse, that it was a curse. But Grandma Zepha, who couldn't read or write but knew every leaf in the bush, looked and said, "This isn't anything serious. This is just a skin rash. Nature wounds. Nature heals." Maria opened her eyes and looked back at Alice through the crack. The color of the spots, the way the skin peeled at the edges. The sweet, nauseating smell emanating from the room. It wasn't the smell of illness. It was the smell of the wrong medicine mixed with the wound that couldn't breathe. The doctors were treating the girl with acids, with strong creams, with antibiotics that killed everything. They were attacking the girl's body as if it were a war. But Maria knew. This skin didn't need war. It needed peace. It needed calm. She noticed a detail that no doctor with a degree had seen. When the girl scratched, her skin didn't bleed right away. It released a thin, yellowish liquid, exactly like Retinia's. My God, thought Maria, feeling a shiver down her spine. They're burning the girl's skin with these expensive medications. They're treating it like it's a bacterial infection, but it's just her skin screaming for help. Certainty grew in Maria's heart like a strong root. She knew what cured it. It wasn't anything from Switzerland. It didn't cost millions. It was something her grandmother made in the backyard, a simple oil, extracted from a seed that everyone trampled on and didn't value, a thick, golden oil that smelled of damp earth. Maria saw her father, the powerful Mr. Roberto, enter the room. He looked like a ghost. He ran his hand over his daughter's head fearfully, as if she were made of glass. Maria felt deep pity for that rich man. He had gold, but he was poor in wisdom. He was blinded by despair. He trusted the men of thick books and ignored the wisdom of the earth. She wanted to scream. She wanted to go in there and say, "Stop! You're hurting her!" But the voice of the housekeeper, Matilda, echoed in her head, "You're invisible. You don't exist." The fear of being fired paralyzed Maria's tongue. The fear of losing her grandson's livelihood weighed heavily on her shoulders. She lowered her head and resumed scrubbing the floor forcefully, trying to cleanse the anguish she felt. But the image of the girl suffering wouldn't leave her mind. She knew she held the cure in her hands, or rather, in her memory. But how? How could an illiterate cleaning lady tell the richest man in town that all his doctors were wrong? How could she say that the solution cost less than a loaf of bread? They would laugh at her, or worse, they would kick her out. But every time she passed near that door, she felt a tug in her heart. It was as if the girl was silently calling to her. Maria began to pay attention to the small details. She saw that the girl worsened after a hot bath. Hot water worsens skin irritation, Grandma Zephyr always said. She saw that the girl worsened when she ate strawberries, a hot fruit, Grandma Zephyr forbade. Everything fit together. Everything confirmed what Maria knew, and the more Maria observed, the more certain she became. Everyone was wrong about that boy, and that certainty was becoming dangerous. The next day, Maria went to work with her heart pounding in her throat. Hidden deep inside her uniform pocket was a small, old vial. It was an empty medicine bottle that she had thoroughly washed and filled with the golden oil she had prepared at home during the night. That small vial weighed more than a bag of cement. It felt like it was burning her leg through the fabric. Maria walked through the mansion's corridors feeling like she was carrying a bomb. With every step she took, the voice of reason screamed in her ear, "Throw that away, Maria! Have you gone mad?" She thought of her grandson's face, little João. She thought of the red electricity bills on the table. She thought of the empty refrigerator. If she were caught with that oil, if her boss thought she was practicing witchcraft or harming his daughter, she would certainly be fired. And worse, he could call the police. He could accuse her of trying to poison the girl. Maria imagined the scene, her being led away in handcuffs, her grandson crying, the shame in the neighborhood. Fear was a cold beast that crawled up her spine. "It's not worth it," she thought. "I'm just the cleaning lady. It's not my problem. They're rich. Let them deal with it." But then she would pass by the bedroom door, and she would hear it. Little Alice's moans wouldn't let Maria find peace. It was a thin sound, like someone who had given up screaming and only suffered quietly. That sound entered Maria's chest and tore everything apart. She remembered her sister Retinia, cured by the same oil. She knew, with every fiber of her being, that she could take away that pain with her hands. To have the cure in her pocket and not use it was a sin. It was like seeing someone drowning, having a lifebuoy in your hand, and not throwing it. "How will I sleep at night?" she wondered. "How will I look at God on Judgment Day and say that I let a child suffer for fear of losing a salary?" The dilemma was cruel. On one side, the survival of her own family. On the other, the salvation of that innocent girl. Maria went to clean the guest bathroom and locked herself inside for 5 minutes. She looked in the mirror. She saw a tired woman with wrinkles of worry, fear in her eyes. She took the small bottle from her pocket and looked at the golden liquid. She fell to her knees on the cold bathroom floor. She clasped her calloused hands and spoke to the only boss she truly feared. "My God, you know I need this money. You know I can't lose this job, but you also know I can't bear to see suffering. Give me a sign, Father. Tell me what to do. If I try to help and get arrested, who will take care of João? But if I do nothing, what kind of Christian am I?" Maria cried. She cried because the life of the poor is always a difficult choice. She cried because it was unfair that she had the solution and couldn't use it because of the idiotic rules of rich people. She wiped away her tears with the sleeve of her uniform. She remembered her grandmother Zephyr saying, "Goodness doesn't ask permission, Maria. Goodness enters and acts." That phrase echoed in her mind like a bell. She stood up. She washed her face in the chic marble sink. The fear was still there, making her legs tremble. But along with the fear, an iron will was born. She put the small bottle back in her pocket. She decided that the risk didn't matter. It didn't matter if Mr. Roberto was a giant and she an ant. That girl's pain had to end. Maria was no longer there for the money. She was there for a mission. She knew she could lose everything, her job, her reputation, her freedom, but she preferred to lose her job than to lose her own humanity. The opportunity would have to be created. She would have to be clever. She would have to be quick. She would have to disobey the most sacred order of that house. Her heart was beating so hard it sounded like a war drum. She took a deep breath, smelling the artificial cleanliness of the house, and touched the pocket where the oil was. It was her weapon against the pain. That night, Victoria made a decision that would change everything. She would either save that child or destroy her own life. The opportunity arose on a stormy night. The sky outside seemed angry, hurling lightning and thunder that made the mansion windows tremble. The lights flickered, going on and off, casting eerie shadows over the house. It was that night that Mr. Roberto received an urgent call, a serious problem at the company, something about losing millions if he didn't sign a document right away. He didn't want to go. He looked at his daughter's bedroom door with a heavy heart. But the fear of becoming poor and no longer being able to pay for her treatments prevailed. He put on his coat, gave strict orders to the housekeeper Matilda not to take her eyes off the girl, and drove off in the rain, tires screeching. The house was plunged into darkness, and the housekeeper Matilda, well, as soon as the master turned his back, her general-like posture crumbled. She was tired. She thought that, with all that rain, the girl would fall asleep and nothing would happen. She sat in the comfortable armchair in the living room, turned the television on very quietly, and within 5 minutes she was snoring with her mouth open. The guard dog was asleep. The house was devoid of surveillance. It was the chance that fate was giving her. Maria was finishing collecting the trash from the hallway. She could hear the housekeeper snoring in the distance, but she also heard something else, a sound that no one else in the house seemed to hear. It wasn't a loud cry like a child throwing a tantrum. It was worse. It was a moan, a low, continuous moan from someone suffering so much they don't even have the strength to scream. It came from the forbidden room. That sound was like a needle piercing Maria's ear. She dropped the trash bag on the floor. She looked down the deserted hallway. Her heart pounded in her throat. Thump, 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 competing with the sound of the rain. She took a step toward the white door, then another. Her legs felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. With each step, she remembered the threats. "You'll be out on the street. You'll go to jail." But the groaning inside grew louder. It was a silent cry for help. Maria reached the door. Her hand was sweating cold. She grasped the icy golden doorknob. She turned it slowly without making a sound. The door opened. The air that escaped was freezing, like air conditioning on full blast. Maria went inside, and what she saw made her stomach churn. The scene was heartbreaking. Little Alice was alone in the giant bed. Her tiny hands were tied to the sides of the bed with gauze bandages, doctors' orders to prevent her from scratching, but the itching was so unbearable that the girl writhed, rubbing her face against the rough pillow, trying to find relief any way she could. Her face was swollen from crying so much. The skin on her neck and arms was a bright red, throbbing, hot as embers. She seemed to be on fire from the inside. Alice opened her eyes and saw Maria. Those big, sad eyes held no fear. They held pleading. The girl looked at Maria as if to say, "Help me, please, make it stop." That look broke down all of Maria's barriers. It broke down the fear of the boss, the fear of the governess, the fear of the police. At that moment, only one truth existed. A child was being tortured by illness and the ignorance of adults. Maria approached the bed. She felt the feverish heat emanating from the girl's body. She saw the open jars of expensive creams on the bedside table, creams full of chemicals that only irritated her more. My God, they're baking the girl alive, Maria thought. Rage surged through her blood. Rage at that useless wealth. Rage at that coldness. She put her hand in her apron pocket. She felt the cold glass. It was her weapon. She knew she had only a few minutes. The boss could return because he'd forgotten his wallet. The housekeeper could wake up to a thunderclap. Any second lost could be the end. If she were caught in there, bent over the girl with a bottle of homemade oil in her hand, no one would believe her. They would say she was practicing witchcraft. They would destroy her life. But Maria looked at the wounds. She saw the skin begging for oil, begging for nature, begging for love. She took a deep breath, drawing air into her lungs as if she were about to dive into a deep sea. She looked at the door one last time to make sure she was alone. She turned her eyes to Alice and whispered, "It will pass, my angel. Auntie will take away this pain. Trust me." Maria pulled the small bottle from her pocket. She uncorked it. The scent of earth and seeds filled the barren room, battling against the smell of alcohol and medicine. Maria took the oil. Her hands trembled like leaves in the wind, but she knew it was now or never. Maria poured a generous drop of oil into the palm of her left hand. The liquid was thick, golden, almost honey-colored, and glistened in the dim light of the room. She rubbed her hands together to warm the oil, reciting a silent but fervent "Our Father." Her hands, calloused from hard work, trembled so much that she was afraid she would spill it all on the silk sheet. If she stained that sheet, it would be proof of the crime. But she didn't stop. She leaned over the bed, over Alice's small, wounded body. Outside, a thunderclap boomed, making the windows vibrate. It was the exact moment Maria touched the girl's skin. The first contact was a shock. Alice's skin was burning, hot as a stovetop. The girl flinched, frightened by the touch of a stranger. But Maria didn't back down. She began to apply the oil with light circular movements as soft as a feather. She didn't rub hard, she caressed. She started with her little arms, where the marks were most vivid and red. "Calm down, my daughter. Let nature take its course," Maria whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Something incredible happened. It seemed like magic, but it was just nature doing its work. The girl's skin, which was dry and parched like the earth of the arid backlands on a sunny day, began to drink the oil. It drank it thirstily. It absorbed everything in seconds. Wherever Maria's hand touched, the bright, irritated redness began to subside. The feverish heat emanating from her body began to diminish, as if someone had thrown water on a bonfire. Alice, who had been tense, her muscles stiff with pain, began to relax. Her little eyes, which had been wide with terror and suffering, began to feel heavy. The infernal itching, that sharp pain that had kept her awake for months, stopped. It faded until it was nothing. The oil formed a cool barrier, an immediate relief that none of those expensive creams imported from France had been able to provide. The scent of wild herbs filled the room, drowning out the smell of the hospital. It was the scent of life, the scent of hope. Maria continued. She rubbed it on his neck, then his face, then his little legs. She watched before her eyes as the white scabs softened and fell off, revealing new, healthy skin underneath. The inflammation was going away. It was like watching a withered flower lift its head after the rain. Maria wept as she applied the oil. Her tears fell on her face, but she didn't even wipe it away. She was witnessing a miracle performed with inexpensive seeds and faith. Suddenly, Alice made a sound sound. It wasn't a cry, it wasn't a groan of pain. It was a sigh, a deep, long sigh, coming from the bottom of her chest. Ah! It was the sound of relief. It was the sound of someone taking a backpack of stones off their back. The girl looked at Maria, and for the first time in years, there was no pain in her eyes. There was gratitude. The girl, who barely spoke, stretched out her loose little hand, which Maria had untied, and grasped the cleaning lady's thick, rough finger. She squeezed tightly. "It stopped," the girl whispered, her voice hoarse. "It doesn't hurt anymore, Auntie. It stopped." Maria's heart burst. She wanted to shout with joy. She wanted to run out and tell the world that she had healed the girl. Alice closed her eyes, and in less than a minute was asleep. A deep, peaceful sleep, without scratching, without moving. The sleep of angels that she hadn't had since she was born. Maria stood there, watching the girl's chest rise and fall slowly. The skin, once red, was now pink and calm. The room was at peace. The storm outside seemed to have ended as well. Maria put the little bottle in her pocket. She felt a peace she had never felt in her life. She had disobeyed the rules, risked everything, but she had won. She saved the child. She felt gigantic. She felt like the richest woman in the world, even with her shoes full of holes. She smoothed the girl's hair one last time and prepared to leave, walking softly, happy as could be, ready to go back to being the invisible cleaning lady. But happiness is short-lived in the house of fear. Before Maria could reach the door to leave, the roar of a powerful car engine tore through the silence of the night. Headlights illuminated the window. Doors slammed shut downstairs. Heavy, hurried footsteps began to climb the stairs, making the wood crack. Raised voices echoed in the hallway. The boss had returned, and he wasn't alone. Worse still, the housekeeper Matilda had woken up and was shouting downstairs, "Who left the bedroom door open?" Maria's blood ran cold. She looked at the bottle of oil in her pocket. She looked at the sleeping girl, untied. She was trapped at the crime scene. She had nowhere to hide. But before they could celebrate, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Victoria knew. Her life had just changed forever. The bedroom door burst open with a bang, slamming against the wall. Mr. Roberto entered, his eyes bloodshot, like a lion ready to pounce. Behind him, the housekeeper Matilda came screaming hysterically, pointing her trembling finger at Maria. "I knew it! I knew that woman was dangerous!" Matilda yelled. "Look what she did! She untied the girl! She touched the girl!" Roberto saw Maria standing beside the bed, a small bottle of oil in her hand. The scent of herbs filled the room, a smell that to him resembled dirt from the bush. In his mind, it was an attack. He thought the ignorant cleaning lady had thrown some kind of trash on his daughter's sensitive skin. His anger surged so quickly he was blinded by rage. He lunged at Maria, snatched the bottle from her hand, and threw it forcefully against the wall. The glass shattered, scattering the golden oil across the fine wood floor. "You crazy woman! You irresponsible woman!" Roberto shouted, his voice trembling with hatred. "Who do you think you are? You want to kill my daughter. I gave you a job and you repay me with this. Get out of here! Now! I'm going to call the police. I'm going to end your life." Maria shrank back, crying, trembling like a leaf. "Boss, listen to me. I just wanted to help. She was suffering," she tried to explain, sobbing. "Shut up!" he roared. "Don't you dare speak! Matilda, get that woman out of here now. Throw her things into the street. I want her arrested today." Matilda grabbed Maria's arm tightly, digging her nails in, and began to drag her out of the room like a sack of trash. Maria looked back at the girl on the bed, heartbroken, thinking she had failed, thinking all was lost. Roberto, fuming with rage, rushed to the edge of the bed to assess the damage. He was prepared for the worst. He expected to see his daughter crying, bleeding, her skin burned by some disgusting homemade mixture. He was already grabbing his cell phone to call the on-call doctor, ready to yell for an ambulance. "Daddy's here, daughter. Daddy's going to save you from these crazy people," he said, reaching out to touch the girl's arm, afraid of what he might feel. But when his hand touched Alice's skin, time stopped. Mr. Roberto froze. He didn't feel the heat of the fever. He didn't feel the roughness of the wounds. The skin was cool. It was soft. He ran his hand over it slowly in disbelief. He quickly turned on the bedside lamp. What he saw made his cell phone fall from his hand onto the carpet. The red spots, those spots that no Swiss remedy had removed, were fading. Her skin was clear, rosy. The open wounds had closed. The swelling had completely disappeared. And the most shocking thing of all, Alice was sleeping. Sleeping soundly, sleeping without scratching. Her chest rose and fell in a peaceful rhythm that Roberto hadn't seen in 7 years. He looked at the bedside table. He saw dozens of bottles of expensive medicine with labels in English and French that cost a fortune and had never done anything but burn his daughter's skin. And he looked at the floor, where the cleaning lady's simple oil was spilled, glistening humbly. The truth hit him in the face with the force of a punch. He, the powerful man, the man who studied at the best schools, had been deceived. The famous doctors with their diplomas on the wall and their luxurious offices had failed. They treated the girl like a number, like an experiment. They complicated what was simple. And who had the answer? Who had the cure? The woman he had just humiliated. The woman who cleaned his floor. The woman he called crazy. His legs felt weak. He fell to his knees beside the bed, holding his daughter's little hand. The guilt he felt before tripled. He had trusted the wrong people. He had disregarded simple wisdom out of pure prejudice. He looked at the open door, through which Matilda had dragged Maria. The silence in the room was absolute, but in Roberto's head there was a deafening noise of regret. He realized that his arrogance had almost cost his daughter her health. He realized that his money had built a wall that prevented healing from entering. Roberto had spent years searching for a miracle in luxury hospitals and distant laboratories, and in his blindness he had almost destroyed the only true miracle that knocked on his door. Mr. Roberto didn't walk to the door. He ran. He, who never lost his composure, ran barefoot down the hallway, slipping on the waxed floor, shouting like a madman, "Stop! Matilda, stop!" He caught up with the two of them at the service gate, in the pouring rain. Matilda was pushing Maria onto the wet sidewalk. Maria was crying, hugging herself, trembling from the cold and humiliation. "Let her go!" Roberto shouted, his voice startling Matilda. The housekeeper immediately released Maria's arm, completely bewildered. "But boss, you said," she stammered. Roberto didn't look at the housekeeper. He only had eyes for the cleaning lady. The rain soaked his expensive suit, ruined his impeccable hair, but he didn't care. He looked at that simple, petite woman in her worn uniform. And there, in front of the astonished security guards, in front of the shocked housekeeper, the richest man in the city did the unthinkable. Mr. Roberto bent his knees. He knelt in the mud on the dirty ground of the service entrance. He who never bowed his head to anyone bowed before the cleaning lady. He took Maria's rough hands, those calloused hands he had despised, and held them in both his own, weeping copiously. "Forgive me," he sobbed, his voice broken and weak. "For God's sake, forgive me. I'm blind. I'm a fool. You saved my daughter, and I treated you like trash." Maria's eyes widened. She never imagined seeing that giant brought down. She felt her boss's warm tears falling onto her hands, mingling with the rain. Her pure heart held no resentment. She squeezed his hands and said in a sweet voice, "Get up, Roberto. You don't need to do this. The important thing is the girl." "Is the girl all right?" Roberto stood up, still holding her hand, as if it were a lifeline. "Thanks to you, she's fine. Come, please. Go back inside. You're not my maid. Today, you're my daughter's doctor." They went back to the room. When they entered, Alice was waking up. The girl opened her eyes and, for the first time in years, didn't scratch her skin. She sat up in bed, looked at her clean skin, and smiled. When she saw Maria coming in, the girl's eyes lit up. She stretched out her arms. She didn't ask for her father. She asked for Maria. "Auntie," the girl called. Maria ran and hugged the girl. And in that hug, between the tycoon's daughter and the poor cleaning lady, Roberto saw the greatest lesson of his life. He saw that true love doesn't cost money. He saw that the cure wasn't in diplomas hanging on the wall, nor in million-dollar machines. The cure was in simplicity. The cure was in what money can't buy: compassion and wisdom inherited from the earth. Roberto ordered the arrogant specialists fired. He promoted Maria, but not to head cleaner. He asked her to be Alice's official caregiver, with the salary she deserved, so that she would never again be in need, so that her grandson would have everything. The mansion, once cold and silent, came alive. Now laughter could be heard. Now stories could be heard. The ice had melted. That night, Watching his daughter sleep peacefully holding Maria's hand, Roberto looked up at the sky through the window. He didn't thank his fortune. He thanked God for sending an angel disguised as a cleaning lady. He learned that arrogance is the most serious disease there is, and that humility is the only cure. Sometimes God doesn't send miracles in the form of diplomas or boxes of imported medicine. He sends them in willing, calloused hands and faithful hearts. And that's all a miracle needs.